Hello, welcome. It's nice to see such a nice crowd. Thank you for coming out, Govies. Thank you for coming out, parents. If you don't know me, I'm Alan Rossi. I'm chair of the Creative Writing Department. And these are our winter readings featuring the junior students. Before we get started, please silence the cell phones. It's totally fine to take a picture, but just make sure it's the phone is quiet. That can kind of, throw a wedge in a reading. You have a little program in your hand. That is not necessarily the order the students will read in. That's just the alphabetical order of the class. But we wanted to have a little memento for you. Also, on the back of that, there's a QR code. If you are so inclined to support the Creative Writing Department, you can just scan that and you'll be taken to a link. We've had some amazing guests this fall. Ron Rash, internationally renowned writer, was here with our students. We'll be having Sue Cho, a poet, in the spring, literary agent Dune Adams, and then hopefully two more that I can't announce yet because they're not fully booked, but hopefully two more. So your support really helps us with those guests. And the students benefit from seeing these guests, both professional writers and this year a literary agent. We're trying to give them some semblance of what it's like out in the professional world as a writer. So thank you if you've donated and if you're thinking about it. Okay, now let me say a little bit about this junior class. Tonight you're going to be hearing mainly nonfiction from the group, and that's because they've taken a full class of nonfiction with Mr. Scott Gould right over here. And they're not quite finished with my fiction course. Many of them are still in the revision process. But I've learned a lot about this group in the 7 weeks or so that they've been in class. They're so hardworking. They've read and analyzed stories incredibly well, and they've written their own stories with the craft elements they've learned in class. What you'll be hearing tonight are pieces that have been revised through multiple drafts. What happens in the revision process is often quite tedious. Lines aren't quite right. Scenes need filled out. Ideas need further developed. And that's not an easy process. It's incredibly difficult. And it takes surrendering oneself to the process and focusing on the process rather than the result. And these students have done that, working meticulously to find the right way a story needs told. And the remarkable thing about this class is just how willing they are to engage with the real process of writing. And, except when they're bullying me, that's a total joke, parents, I couldn't be more proud of them, really. And so, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, River McGee.
Hello, my name is River McGee, and I'm from Myrtle Beach. I will be reading a piece called Augar, and I'll just be reading a few pieces from that excerpts from that piece. Augar, an Old Norse word which means turn the wrong way. It describes something that isn't quite right. In Middle English, that word became awk, meaning backward or clumsy. Awk added a syllable and morphed into awkward, defined as lacking skill, not easy to deal with, not socially graceful, not enough. The word can describe the fit of a shirt that clings too tight to your arms, someone who sits right next to you on a bus filled with empty seats, and people who never know what the right thing is to do in the moment. Part 3. A tall, skinny guy stands roughly 30 feet away from you. He smiles crookedly. To any onlooker, he would appear sweet and charming. No, he has a demonic soul, a thirst for chaos and misery, because right behind him is a door, and he's holding it open for you. If this were a movie, your inner dialogue would be slow-mo screaming, "No!" You try to non-verbally plead for him to close the door and continue on his merry door-holding way. Either he doesn't get the hint or he doesn't care, because he smiles even wider and presses the door open even more. Don't hold the door open. You start jogging over to him. A bead of sweat slowly drips down your neck. The sun beats down on both of you, and he places his hand over his eyes to block the rays. You can't see his eyes, but you can imagine them filled with regret as he wonders, why is this girl so slow? You wish you knew. Your breathing turns into heavy panting. Just keep going. He nods enthusiastically at you. You jog faster. The door nears and a rush of adrenaline shoots through your body. You cross through the door like a marathon runner after a 5K. The guy smiles down at you. You clasp your hands together as you bow your head and repeatedly tell him thank you. The air conditioning hits you, a rush of cold air against your sweaty, overheated body. You want to fall to the ground and kiss it like the Pope smooches a tarmac when he lands in a new country. Part 5. Your classroom stinks of sweat and Axe body spray. You pretend to listen to your freshman English teacher drone on about rhetorical devices while you strum your fingers on the cold desk and stare at Jackson. For 2 years, you have been in each other's classes, and year after year, you spend too much time pretending to read a book while you're really listening to his conversations. You stare at him and plan your wedding. His eyes catch yours. The air around you grows colder, and it gets hard to breathe. Play it cool. Your head snaps in the other direction. You take a calming breath and slowly move your gaze around the room, glancing at the people he is sitting next to and the poster behind his head, making it seem as though you just happened to be looking at him. He didn't notice anything, right? The bell rings and you jolt to your feet. Your class all streams out of the room and into the hallway. Jackson starts slowing down. He walks up to you. Your heart tightens. This is it. What's up, he asks. What's up? What do you say to that? Gas prices? National debt? The age of government officials? You blink rapidly and try to process. Dozens of kids push past you. You have to say something, but you can't think of what to say. He walks forward and you take 2 giant steps backward. You're left awkwardly standing at his back, wishing you had said something. You feel like there is something wrong with you, like you're turned in the wrong direction, completely and utterly Augar. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tatiana Fosnat. I'm from Somerville, South Carolina, and I'll be reading an excerpt from my fiction piece, Never the Baby Jesus. From the moment I was born, my mother's greatest wish was for me to be the baby Jesus. I could never say for certain what prompted her obsession, but in my mind it all went something like this. Alice Allen was a single, soon-to-be mother of 2, and she tried hard with the first kid. She really did. She read 12 different parenting books, 10 with cherubs and halos printed across the covers. She named her son Paxton for peace. She hung a clay imprint of his hands in the foyer so that when he got older, he would know he had always been loved. Alice followed all the old wives' tales, buying him shoes early so he would start walking sooner, feeding him carrots so he wouldn't need glasses, washing his rompers in cold water to ward off melanoma, setting him to sleep with his beady-toed feet facing west so he wouldn't grow up to be a drug lord in eastern Chicago. Her baby was going to be perfect. At the very least, he would be a decent kid. Alice lost her first bit of faith the day Paxton's 3rd grade teacher phoned home at lunch. The poor woman hadn't noticed the piss puddle on her alphabet carpet until she stepped into the A for Apple square, now stained orange. Paxton never admitted to anything, only because he was too busy with his laughing fit in the beanbag chair. It was this, and then it was taking scissors to a 5th grade girl's thin blonde braids at recess, and then it was taking a faded fist to the face. With every new week came another class reptile shoved into a locker, with every birthday party a broken bone or trampoline. And with every principal visit and page added to Paxton's stocky file, Alice's confidence slipped further toward the pit of her stomach. We think, the principal would say, as if some divine council had gathered in sky-high chairs solely to assess the mentality of her son, Paxton's behavioral issues may stem from his father's absence within the home. Alice would then imagine leaning forward, spitting into the ceramic coffee mug where the principal kept his ballpoint pens and saying, "Yeah, well, so do mine." When she became pregnant with her 2nd child, things started out a little too much like they had the first time around. It was a Saturday night, and Alice hadn't seen her boyfriend in weeks. She was reading yet another self-help book, this one with a clip art baby and pacifier on the cover, and a title that might have gone something like, Parenting, Take 2, because your first kid tied your landlord's shoelaces together at the top of a staircase, so now Gary's in a leg cast, and your son's probably going to become a drug lord in northern Washington, because we all know he would never make it in the eastern Chicago drug scene, when Alice had an epiphany. The next morning, she tossed her books into the neighbor's dumpster, stuffed Paxton into an oversized Navy sport coat, and drove them both to church. Thank you.
Hello? 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 Oh, hang on. Oh, no. Hang on. Hello? Okay, maybe we're good, hopefully. I'm Isabelle Garcia from Pickens, South Carolina, and this is a fiction piece about trees. I started high school 2 weeks after we moved to central South Carolina from a college town in West Virginia. That first day, I marched from class to class across linoleum floors in a panic, back ramrod straight, eyes locked ahead, a weight pressing in on my chest. In one of my classes, homeroom, I think, this guy, I'd later learn his name was Luis, called out to me from a desk over. Hey, kid, you. Hey, kid? I don't think he can hear you, a friend of his sitting behind him said. I saw him shrug and turn back to his desk out of the corner of my eye, but I kept my head forward, shoulders up, so tense I was shaking. I walked out of that class alone. There's a cluster of pine trees stretching to the sky near the top of the long gravel lane that twists up to my grandparents' house. Every day on the way back from school, my grandmother and I would drive past them. Their jagged branches protect a cavern, a recluse hidden beneath their limbs. A few forgotten lawn chairs sit on top of the needles within the embrace of the pines, accompanied by the remnants of a small rock wall that winds under their branches. I loved trying to climb these trees, despite the protrusions of broken-off limbs and the hordes of spiderwebs draped around their branches. I remember one evening, during the late spring, I decided to climb the pine closest to the house, right at the edge of my grandmother's garden. I was wearing a pink sweater and sweatpants, even though it was too hot for either article of clothing. The pine's bark was so splintery that pieces and fragments crumbled as I hoisted myself into its branches, getting stuck in my clothes and hair. I climbed until the branches grew too thin to use as handholds and then eased myself onto a sturdy-feeling branch, sighing. The pine's splintered bark pressed against my back as I leaned against its trunk, dangling a leg off of a branch. Behind me, the sun slipped below the western horizon, glinting through the trees. I was lonely, but up in that tree, I could ignore that. The pine's branches held me above the ground. A few black ants, or maybe they were red, crawled along a jagged branch that stretched past my head. Cicadas began to hiss, their buzz rising from the woods. Yellow rectangles of light pierced the dark, the windows of my grandparents' house intruding upon the night. I was tired, so tired, but if I went back inside, I knew I'd just trudge to my room and shut the door, shut the window, and shut everything and everyone out, which is exactly what I did. A couple months after the move, I stood on the soft carpet of my room, fumbling with the creaky door of my closet. It sometimes fell off its slider. When I saw the gray fleece jacket I had thought I'd lost in the move to South Carolina. Clothes hangers rattled as I pushed them aside and reached for the jacket. It looked like it always had, felt like it always had. Almost every day of the 6th and 7th grade, I had worn this jacket, a gift from my mother. Some people couldn't recognize me without it. It reminded me of Dylan and Troy and Austin, friends I had left behind in West Virginia. Dylan had a jacket that he wore almost as much. His was gray and striped with horizontal, desaturated blue lines. In the halls between classes, we'd walk side by side, jacket and jacket, laughing together. Troy also had a jacket, though he didn't wear it as often as we wore ours. Its black nylon was so long on him that it almost dragged on the floor. He had gotten it from his mother, too. Troy's first name was Lucas, but since that's my brother's name, I called him Troy. We were on our middle school's cross-country team, and we'd run together when we had practice in Morgantown's Arboretum, up and down the sloping paths, twisting through the forest, talking about anything and everything. Our coach, Coach Brooks, sometimes scolded us for it. You need to be giving it your 110%, he'd say. You're out here to practice, not chit-chat. Austin ran cross-country, too. He put 110% into everything he did. We'd run together during varsity practices, pushing each other on. Our names were always close to each other in the meet results. He was usually ahead of me. I stood on the old carpet of my grandparents' house, staring at that jacket. I thought about how long it had been since I had ran with Austin or chit-chatted with Troy. I thought about how long it had been since I had seen Dylan. I thought about how long I had been lonely for. Weaving through my grandparents' forest is an old, thin log road, paved with red and orange and brown leaves. Trees, small and large, flank its curving path. Sunlight filters and birds chirp through their leaves. Towering hills rise around the road. There's a small stream that trickles between them through the wood. The spring of sophomore year and the following summer, I'd go walking along this road every day, listening to music or practicing lines for my school's production of Romeo and Juliet, or butchering something on my ukulele. In the woods, I could let my shoulders fall, let my eyes wander between bright leaves and gnarled bark. Deeper in my grandparents' forest, closer to the stream, there's a small, flat-topped stone that my mother calls the circus rock. When the forest was much younger, she and her older sister would pretend it was a stage and play act, circus, and theater performances on it. Behind the rock, 2 trees grow side by side, so close to the stone that their bark brushes against it. Late in the summer of 2023, I was wandering through my grandparents' forest, with my ukulele in its plastic cloth case bouncing against my back, when I passed by the circus rock. I stepped up onto the rock, paint-stained shoes tapping against stone, and looked up through the sunlight falling between the leaves. I stared up at the 2 trees rising up from rotting leaves just behind the circus rock. I tilted my head at it and frowned. Stretching between the 2 trees, what looked like a diagonal trunk grew from one to the other, linking them together. Huh, I thought. That's pretty cool. Inosculation is the word for that diagonal trunk, the 2 trees connected by a shared bridge of tissue and wood. It occurs when bark is scraped off at a point of contact between the trees. In response, they generate callus tissues that meld together, interlinking the 2 trees. The vascular systems of the trees eventually couple, letting water and nutrients be exchanged. When I was very young, my mother and I would sometimes play in a tree-filled field in front of West Virginia University's music department, while waiting for my little brother to finish his piano lesson so I could take my turn. A few of the trees in this field grew together, inosculated, with their connected trunks forming archways that we'd pretend were portals to other worlds. The connections between those trees and the trees by the circus rock didn't grow overnight. It took time for their calluses to push together and harden to wound wood. It took time for their vascular tissue to join. And thinking back on those trees, I realized that growing my own connections would take time too. I just needed a little patience. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Indigo. I'm from Anderson, South Carolina. I'm going to be reading an excerpt today from a piece called Overseas Citizen. That winter day, we sat in the center of a traffic jam outside of the city of Kochi, Kerala, it's a southwestern state in India, on our way to a retirement home with my grandparents. Luckily, the schedule wasn't going to be an issue. We were going to be late. American rush hour pales in comparison to the massive cars and rickshaws in those Indian streets. My mother was nearly made sick with the jarring stops and starts made by the silent driver to squeeze the already tiny car into even tinier spaces between the families of 4 riding motorcycles. As we swerved sharply, I slammed straight into the backpack my mother was wearing, carrying our important items. I wondered if she had our OCI cards. We needed that overseas citizenship of India to get around. Our family applied for them. Before coming to make things easier for future trips. Longer stay times, easy travel, the perfect fit for every member of the Indian diaspora worldwide. But despite the name, it does not grant citizenship. No voting, no free services. We are not Indians. That little powder blue card lets me in, but does not let me be of. I'm not a stranger, although I am still a foreigner. The ride was awkward and I was cramped. The blaring horns of the throng that sounded like a clown convention made us all collectively want to go insane. Without any real AC, the vehicle cooked us because midday in India brings heat that makes asphalt burn, and winters in Malabar are mild at best. We smelled of sweat, our breath was heavy, maybe our karmic punishment for eating a meal of lamb the day before. Krishna warns that Dharma really prefers that we not. Achama means father's mother, fanned herself, her thin, brown, and bony hands creased with age. A street-side shop yielded some strange off-brand Pepsi that my brother cooled himself with. It tasted spicy like Coca-Cola with cardamom. The sticky condensation on the can matched the perspiration on our skin. As the driver took a quick turn around a corner, the assisted living home came into view. White pillared and stout, familiar European-style building in the middle of Kerala's vegetative lushness. No comment from the person we were here for. Achachan, means father's father, was tired. Sweating and silent, he leaned back against the headrest, breath heavy, eyes closed. I didn't try to wake him. In his sleep, Achachan cared not even that Achama was still as talkative as ever, loud Malayalam and Hindi and English to my father as he exasperatedly nodded along with her excited conversation. My father tried once to teach me Hindi, that lingua franca of the subcontinent. Although he himself was starting to grow a little less fluent with less use, his effort was adamant, but for naught. I couldn't understand the Devanagari Abugida, the lack of vowels, strange rules. You had to breathe out for BH and DH, the H is in silent, entirely different grammar. I much preferred to listen. and Spanish class was enough work. Sitting in silence, though, I found myself listening. I found myself straining to recall those lessons, trying to fit into the conversation. I wish I tried harder. Still, my father spoke well then, even if he was no match for Achama's rapid pace. As she spoke, she sat beside Achacha as he half slept, half aware. I didn't know much, but I knew Achacha was getting worse. We already knew he had early onset dementia at the least. The car pulled into the lot. The retirement staff helped Achacha in, even offered a wheelchair for the duration of the visit so he wouldn't need to exert himself. I didn't know how to feel about the place. I didn't know how to feel about Achacha. I love him, but I never really got to know him, and now he seemed to be slowly unknowing me. I'd been told things about him. One of 10 kids, chose his own last name, Surendranath to Nath, went as far as Japan for his job. I never seen that Achacha. This Achacha looked confused, lost when my father told him where we were for the second time as we took him inside. Achacha was too old for these kinds of trips. That's it.
Hi, my name is Erica Holmes. I'm from Columbia, South Carolina. I'm reading an excerpt from a nonfiction piece called Avoiding Romance in Friendships, Helpful Tips. Let's say you have this friend. Could be your best friend or just a friend you hang out with when all your other friends are busy. You don't have romantic feelings towards them. You're just friends. That's what you think at least. Just to be clear, I mean a platonic friend. Zero flirting, no tension, no kissing, unless that's how you roll. Of course, there's going to be a disconnect between you and your friend as your feelings aren't quite going to match up. You want to have slumber parties. Your friend wants to swap spit. Have no fear. The introduction of romance can assassinate a friendship, but it doesn't have to. If you tread carefully in a sea of overblown kiddie feelings, you can totally salvage a friendship and even make your bond stronger. Tip number 1, be kind. Don't be a poo-poo caca jerk. Don't become a PCJ after your friend confesses their feelings. Be empathetic. Don't jump the shark and start talking crap. Like, your friend is not attempting an attack on your life or something. In the grand scheme of things, their crush will not result in the end of the world. Don't treat it as such. Your feelings of potential disgust and general discomfort are valid, but so are theirs. Remember that everyone has different feelings and interpretation of things, and just because your interpretation of your friendship misalign, that does not give you the entitlement to blow their brains out. For example, let's say you have this friend, Lasagna. Lasagna was a friend of yours since primary school. You've been in the same class and stayed classmates through your years at your elementary school. You think of him as a brother. One day, you two are talking about things sixth graders talk about. Boobs, instruments, who can run the fastest, who has a crush on who. That's your routine gossip of the day. In the middle of the conversation, he springs his crush on you. You look around to make sure there are no cameras or boys hiding in the trees. You ask for clarification to ensure you aren't too mental, and it turns out he's had a crush on you for a while. You have to let him down gently. No outbursts, laughing, or jokes. Just a legit heart-to-heart in which you convey your feelings the best way a sixth grader can. No poo-poo cacas to be seen around these parts. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Harper Brgh, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a nonfiction piece. It's called Summer When I Outgrow My Body. Section 1, June. I'm allergic to my own body, I realize, when the sun sits high enough in the sky that it sticks there for a few more hours than usual. I am 16, and when the air conditioner switches on in the summer, it makes my house smell like the dog that died years ago. Slowly, I lose feeling in all the parts that matter and learn how to use all the parts that don't. Change begins at the edges of my body, and I feel it as my back presses into sand and my brother is next to me. I am at a beach I can't pronounce the name of, but that is unimportant. What matters is that the waves are retreating and the sun touches as much skin as it can. It is this feeling, the warmth that tingles my skin and makes my toes curl, that forces me to notice how my body is shifting as often and quickly as the tide drags in and out. Topless, the woman to my right flips on her towel. I don't understand how the women here are so comfortable in their bodies, but they are, and this is what lives under my tongue and tries to choke me when I remove my shirt. From somewhere behind us, two girls saunter towards the water, and I smell my brother's gaze on the small of their backs, rancid and foul like a wild animal breathing down its prey. I wonder if this is the experience I am resigned to, inspected, then frenzied upon, like a piece of food left to the seagulls. And yet, Summer has not begun to mold me into the clay figure I am to become before the fall, so I get to remain disproportionate and cracked, left to dry out in the sun. I return my eyes to the ocean, not understanding that starting now, my eyes will always be concerned about the rest of my body. My brother is soon asleep, his eyes pressed tightly shut. Section 2, July. The hot air finally arrives and brings some changes. I shed my lips, molting and baking the unused skin until my new smile knows its own form, then the process starts over. I learned how to speak with these lips, how to sing with them, and in a blue room with one too many lights, how to kiss with them. When I tug on them too hard and the seams begin to show, blood infecting the mouth when I smile wide enough, I drape them outside to relax in the dry heat next to the wet bathing suits and underwear I have bled into again. This is my skin, recently discovered by hands and sunlight, almost gold brushed on the tops of my arms and shoulders, milky white in all the areas where eyes aren't supposed to wander. This is my skin, red on my shoulders, nose, and chest when I spend too much time thinking about the sun, red under my eyes when I spend too much time thinking about myself. I want my freckles to suffocate me before they're gone with the heat. I want the heat to suffocate me. As the temperature grows, my hand melts into someone else's until we are interlocked like roots that have merged together. He transplants me to his home where he tells me he loves me. My body no longer shifts in the daylight because I sleep in his bed by day, craving the cooler summer nights when cicadas speak for you and you don't have to think. Becoming nocturnal means ignoring the growing pains until the moon is out and pain feels more like love than anything else. I'm in a room in my house that doesn't feel like mine, too white, too light, too clean. I am beginning to understand how to use my body correctly, how to sway my hips and bend my face into a shape that men will listen to. But when I am alone again, my pillow becomes my sponge, used for cleaning up messy nights where the tears threaten to set into my bed, salt eating into the frame like termites, chewing and tearing up every memory that lives on that mattress. But my bed is close enough to an ocean, so I am happy enough. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cherry Chesman. I'm from Lexington, South Carolina, and today I'm going to be reading an excerpt of a nonfiction piece called Ordinary Girl. On an afternoon in early July, the summer before third grade, the air was hot enough to make me forget Canada was known for its cold. The apartment's neutral colors were dull in the sunlight, leaving every surface warm and washed out. The white, drippy HVAC unit under one of the windows made bothersome grinding noises, but was doing little of its actual job. I sat under the breeze of a desk fan, searching for something to do. After a time spent scrolling Netflix, the minutes completely indistinguishable from one another, a logo, brightly colored, fantastical, alluring, for a TV show caught my eye. 3 teen girls laying on a white sand beach with gigantic orange fish tails hanging above their heads, all soaking wet and smiling. I clicked on the show's profile photo to read the synopsis, eagerly jumping at the possibility of distraction. H2O, Just Add Water, Season 1, Episode 1, Metamorphosis. Emma and Cleo meet new girl Ricky and find themselves stuck on Mako Island, where they are transformed into mermaids. As well as growing tails, the girls find they have powers over water. In the midst of a sluggish afternoon, the description felt like a chilled, comfortable opportunity. I don't think I was aware of my surroundings while I watched the first episode, or if everything besides my laptop screen became a singular, unimportant blend. I binged an unknown amount of the show that day, enough for the details to bleed together and become inseparable. This happened again the next day while doing crafts, only stopping after my eyes began to sting when I blinked. And the many, many days after that, something similar would always repeat. I watched as much as I could get away with, even after the horror of hot Canadian boredom was over and my hot Arkansas screen time restrictions came back. The riptide of H2O had pulled me away far and fast. I don't know why the appeal was so strong, why I fell for the siren's call of such a bad show. If I really had to guess, then I would point towards its newness, its relevance. The shows I'd had exposure to were either made blatantly for toddlers or grandmothers. H2O was as poor quality as a pre-tween girl cash grab could be, but I was a pre-tween girl. I watched it while practicing chopstick skills with grapes and cheese cubes in the fall, in the stone-cold basement during winter break. I was still enamored when the heat and the sun started to come back. The fictional mermaid girls were closer to me than anyone else on TV, even though most of their problems were either completely fantastical or foreign. Their issues were clouded behind the tool of mermaiddom, with a solid real-world foundation you could grasp if you looked underneath. Part of the show was watching with rapt attention, gawking at the magical happenings of fantastical girls, and another part of it was wondering, could I be like them when I get older? Under the newness and the connection I felt, there was also the tantalizing allure of maturity, or at least an elementary school girl's version of maturity. The ever-elusive and confusing topic of boys was discussed in almost every episode. Emma and Cleo and Ricky party and argue in TV7 approved ways. It was close enough to danger, with the mildness of something entirely appropriate. Thank you.
My name is this loud enough? Yeah, okay. A little closer. This fine? Okay. My name is Channing Bush. I'm from Summerville, South Carolina, and I'm gonna read an excerpt from a fun little nonfiction piece that I wrote called Growth and Development Unit. First, the dread. Mr. Paul was one of those notorious teachers that your older siblings said they hoped you didn't have when you reached their grade. Not to mention the story going around about one girl dropping his class because he called her out and made her cry. I didn't want to be her, so when I saw Mr. Paul as my science teacher on my 7th grade schedule, the first thing I felt was dread. Like an acquired taste, one you either loved or hated. I hated him, and one may think that I've since matured from my stubborn, vehement 7th grade attitude, but no, not when it comes to Mr. Paul. He stood tall at about 6'4" and looked about in his mid-50s. His mohawked hair held a light brown despite its graying on the edges, but his goatee had completely grayed. He had a rectangular face with a dull jaw, and he wore black glasses. He had a peculiar voice, gruff and pitchy, and when he talked, he tipped the pitch of his voice up and down like he was forecasting the news. He used to serve in the Navy, which seemed to have made him tough and a bit harsh, though a sense of humor endured the strict military regimen just a little bit. After the Navy, he told us he took up golf. That made me hate him even more, because I also hated golf. I hated golf because the more points you had, the worse you were doing, and that notion is the exact opposite of every other sport ever. Usually, having more of something is always better, even outside of sports, unless that something is mold, tumors, or homework from Mr. Paul's class. I recall him assigning us to read a few pages of a science textbook one night. I didn't do it. There wasn't a good reason for me not to do it. I just didn't want to. How would he have known anyway? After class started, he turned to us, the pads of his wide fingers resting on the metal table before him. He leaned forward and asked in his gruff voice, "Who did the reading last night?" Only a few people raised their hands, and I wasn't one of them. I remember thinking that I should have just lied and saved myself the embarrassment, but being asked questions about the reading and not being able to answer would have been exponentially more humiliating than owning up to my negligence. Everyone who didn't raise their hands, get out. We exchanged bewildered looks. Get out, he repeated, his gruff voice growing more acute. Everyone, that is, most of the class, got the message. We slid out of our chairs and filed out of the classroom. We leaned against the purple metal lockers right outside of the classroom. Everyone had their arms crossed in some way or another. We tried to act casual. We waited for a good 15 minutes at least, just standing out in the hall and hoping nobody passed by and wondered about the row of students lined up against the purple lockers. Finally, a student poked her head out of the doorway and peered at us from behind the lockers. "Y'all can come back in," she said, before pulling her head back through the doorway. We filed back into the classroom, eyes shifting around awkwardly, avoiding the gaze of those who actually read, like some sort of underlying resentment or annoyance toward the people who did work floated in the air. It wasn't entirely fair to feel that way, I realized. It was our fault, but the whole thing annoyed me more than it should have. This old, snide, golf-playing military man put us out in the hall because we didn't read a few pages of a lousy textbook? How ridiculous is that? That's what I thought at that moment, not about how it was my fault. I recognize that now as I've taken the time to reflect, but I'm not any less upset. Don't look all confused. You're the ones that didn't do your homework. He shot us all a smug look and started the lesson that we would soon have to take 2.5 pages of notes on. We always took 2.5 pages of notes minimum. That's how I calculated how much time was left of class. 2.5 pages later, I walked out hating Mr. Paul for the foreseeable future. Mr. Paul's classroom was austere, save for a few long metal tables and black plastic stools. Some empty terrarium tanks sat at the back, and a smartboard hung at the front. The lights in the room weren't cozy yellow lights, and he didn't have any lamps with cozy yellow lights either. He had bright white ones. He kept those white lights on at all times, but there wasn't any color for it to bounce off of besides white or black or gray. He made every slide on that smartboard's background white and all of the words black, and every time he forecasted the information on those black and white slides to us, he used a black pointer that retracted when he pushed on it and elongated when he pulled. We were in one of those movies that probably showed on television during his childhood. I thought it safe to assume he probably watched silent films, considering how irked he got when we spoke to one another. I've since learned that Mr. Paul would probably have had one foot in the grave if he were a kid during the era of silent films. I'll refrain from saying anything more that I probably would have said in the 7th grade. Halfway through the year, we got a few weeks off of school since everybody was getting sick at an alarming rate. I remember that I texted my mom freaking out about makeup work for Mr. Paul's class. I forgot all about the work eventually as the weeks went by. And as those weeks became a month, and then even more months, I forgot all about Mr. Paul. That is, until the day my mom came to me and told me to work on my assignments. I realize now how unrealistic it was to expect teachers to forget all about teaching when they have months off of school. But I don't realize why Mr. Paul felt the need to distribute 30-page packets to us for homework. And although I now have a newfound respect for the way he still managed to make science the bane of my existence weeks after I managed to escape his silent film, I can never forgive him.
Hello. I am so happy you all are here. My name is Maya Sinclair. I'm from here in Greenville, and I'm going to be reading 3 sections of a piece in 5 sections called Love, Lies, and Other Spells. Section 1. I've spent my life around people who make magic. This particular night, I hadn't expected magic to be made. The night sky was rich and infinite. The sea foam formed watercolor white shapes. I thought they looked like creatures crawling across the shore. They lapped, metronome rhythmic at the darkest, wettest sand. That's a story, I thought, listening to them rush, recede, because there weren't many things I could think that wouldn't be painful. My face still felt hot from angry, aimless, despairing tears. I looked at the ground, not at my father. The beach air smelled and felt salty and cool despite the languid August warmth. There'd been no languid warmth where we were staying, only old, resolute, room temperature air, the stale kind of feeling that, like the pointless, painful argument I'd had with my parents, lingers. Dad and I might have stood in the soft, cool sand for 30 minutes or for 5. Time disappeared into the low tide. The sea, it reminds me, I wondered whether I'd done enough speaking already to my father on our walk and earlier, of how big and small the world is. Yeah, he agreed, how big and small. I certainly seemed small, like a pebble being taken in, given grace by Stonehenge. We should have been in separate rooms remembering and wishing we weren't remembering. I felt like I was doing prestidigitation, like something in my deck of cards had the man next to me spellbound until he wanted intelligent conversation and a quiet beachside family moment. He wasn't the only one who wanted that. I didn't know what else to do, so I folded my fingers around Dad's. When we returned together. Section 2. The word prestige was not the word prestige hundreds of years ago. It was a nastier version of prestidigitation. It meant deceit, illusion. In fact, prestige and prestidigitation are derivative of the same Latin word, praestrigite, juggler's tricks. That is the sole superficial connection between them. How fitting that words for sleight of hand and for honor should be unrelated. What prestidigitation does have real etymological relation to is the Italian word presto. Prestidigitation and presto are connected through the French preste, meaning nimble, flexible, quick on one's feet, implicitly braced for and prepared to contend with disaster. By learning the etymology of the word prestidigitation, you learn its meaning. Lies and magic make no guarantees. Promises? Those are for prestidigitators. Section 3. My brother laughs when he lies. Ask him to make eye contact and he'll show dimples and his stupidly green eyes will crinkle. He decided one evening, for reasons I don't understand, that our family should play poker. I spent the night glowering at inscrutable cards, two things I am diametrically opposed to: strategy and gambling. Poker requires both. Poker requires pretending. Poker asks players to pay a fee I can't afford. Not so for my brother. He, of course, won the first game. Max preened above his amassed pile of chips, green and 2 shades of gray mingling with his sleek white and black. He didn't say he loved or even liked the game, not out loud. He said it by grinning, bantering, sitting up straight. He'd won. He'd won, and I thanked nothing and no one in particular that this was only poker. For his history of less innocuous displays of boyish cunning, I should be angry, should be concerned, should do the big sisterly thing and remind this disarmingly dishonest child that fortune will one day abandon him. But frankly, I'm just charmed by his easy lies and every board game victory he's cheated his way to. Prestidigitation can mean deceit, untruths, sleight of hand. It can also mean pranks and laughter and failures that don't sting. Not really. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eloise Hill. I'm from Chapin, South Carolina. Well, obviously South Carolina. And I will be reading excerpts from a nonfiction piece called The Smoke of My Mother's Sons. Jack. I watch the smoke rise up from the burning logs high into the sky, making the stars a little hazier above my backyard. Jack sits across from me in a metal chair. When I look at Jack, I have to squint through the smoke, and he seems a little blurry all of a sudden. I try to think of a question to ask him about college. Every time I bring up his internship for the aerospace professor, I get a little lost. Instead, I ask him if he's planning any rock climbing trips. I'm trying to take a group out to Kentucky and do some bouldering there. I've got about 5 people signed up so far. I give a little, "Oh, fun," in response, and I don't have anything else to say. Jack's dingy black Nike running shoes have holes in the soles and rips in the canvas. His refusal to buy new shoes bothers our parents, but I smile every time I think about it. I see the same jokingly petty sense of stubbornness in myself. He's had them for 4 years now, since his freshman year of college. Jack moved out for school when I was in 7th grade, and something about the calm of the house made it feel less like our home. He wasn't 14 anymore, trying to convince all the siblings to help him build a catapult. I wasn't 9 anymore, trying to copy everything my brothers did and said. But now he's 3 feet away from me, and I don't have a single thing to say to him. It's not like I don't know who he is, but I just can't wrap my head around who we are together. What do siblings look like 104 miles away from each other? What does it look like when we finally see each other after months of being apart? And what happens when this smoke gets too thick between us and we can't see each other at all? This second excerpt takes place in an early memory with all 3 of my brothers, Joseph, Isaac, and Jack. We are in the backyard of my first home. An orange haze fogs up the backyard as smoke embers rise from the cool old gas barrel and fly off into the setting sun. I could see my mom's friends through the back door window, and they are looking down at the ancient red sofa just out of sight. My mom lays there and is probably telling them something I'll never hear. Joseph, Isaac, Jack, and I play in the yard. Isaac is up in the treehouse lying in the hammock that sways from the invisible breeze. It isn't really much of a treehouse, more just a platform between the trees that we built a couple of years ago out of Jack's old astronaut-themed bed. The rest of us gather around the hose. We push it deeper and deeper into the ground as the water pressure pushes the sandy soil away. Eventually, we bury it about 6 feet into the ground before realizing that the soil at the top is hardened and we won't be able to pull the hose back up. Wait, is it gonna come out? Okay, well, I'm not going in to tell Dad, Joe said. Ellie, why don't you just go in? They won't care, Jack said. Jack was wrong. They did care. We ended up having to cut off 6 feet of the hose. Somewhere in the middle of Lexington, South Carolina, right behind the old high school, is a buried bit of hose never to see the light of day again. Sometimes I just sit and think about that and wonder whether the green bit of polyester is going to fossilize down there. Later in the evening, the last bit of wood burns into ash and floats into the sky to dance among the stars. A white and cloudy nostalgic light falls over my brothers and me as we swing our legs off the edge of the treehouse and stare into neighbors' yards. Her friends are still over. We are told to keep out of sight for a little while or just stay quiet in our rooms. I have a book outside, the second Harry Potter, but the outdoor light and small fire aren't bright enough to see the page anymore. I watch the outline of my dad fill the back door. He cracks it open and yells out that we can come back in if we want. I breathe in the night air and try not to inhale the gnats that have the audacity to fly around all the 4 of us. After I climb down from the ladder, I stay in the yard for a little bit to watch the last of the fire. The old oil barrel has been out here for years, so long that the rim of it is corroded with rust, and it has small holes. Little cracks in the metal open into wider, unanswered holes. I look over at Jack. I don't realize this then, but I will never talk to Jack about this moment, or any of the other days and nights like this. It will be an unanswered hole in what we saw as kids and our lives. The holes in the soles of those dumb black Nikes will never mend. He will have to buy new shoes, hopefully. He will at least keep that ratty pair. He'll need a way to remember those years of his life. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Quinn Rondo. I'm from Hartsville, South Carolina, and I'll be reading an excerpt from a piece of nonfiction. For the first few months at the library, I was sent to sort and straighten the shelves in the children's section. It wasn't very difficult, of course, just a time-consuming task. I'd go around the library with a cart looking for any books that were out of order or simply placed on shelves haphazardly. After the first few times, though, it seemed like there wasn't anything out of place anymore. A task that used to take me 3 hours now took only 1.5. It seemed there wasn't anyone new coming in to cause a mess, which meant less work for me. This assumption was all but confirmed for me, as I almost never saw kids in the library most days. For the first couple of months, there'd only be a family or 2 coming in to check out books or use the play area. The children's section was by far the quietest section of the whole building, which was always nice when I didn't have my headphones. I didn't have to worry about getting mistaken for an actual employee by parents, have to deal with the rowdy play area kids, or listen to the blaring YouTube videos from the neighboring computer lab. With my one repeating task, I was able to stay in my own little bubble. It took me a while for me to get my first unique assignment. Miss Christie had gathered a list of books to pull from the biography section, most of which not having been checked out in over a decade. Most of the books that were pulled were certainly outdated. Highlights include biographies on Chris Benoit, Osama bin Laden from 2002, Saddam Hussein from 1995, and Bill Cosby when he was still America's dad. I hadn't seen anyone check out a biography up to that point, so I presumed they didn't update that section simply due to lack of interest. It took until after winter break for someone to pick up anything from that section. There were a small tutoring group that would come in after school to study and review what they had learned the day before. The group came to the children's library to work, usually using the reading tables as a workspace. They'd use the space to their advantage, using books from the library to supplement their own materials. Whether it was math, science, English, or history, they'd always try to tie in a book to their studying. I soon realized that people used the library for more than entertainment, but for education as well. For me, it wasn't just a place to read for fun anymore, it was a place to learn. I soon started to grow a bit closer to the library. I'd come in more frequently, breaking my 1 Tuesday a week schedule for more frequently, albeit less structured volunteer work. I was able to connect with the library more and started participating in larger library events. I helped work on the annual summer reading competition, making pins and providing signups for the yearly event. These events also helped me realize that the library was used, just not in the way I thought. Thank you.
Okay, hello, I'm Dune Adams. I'm from Clemson, and I'll be reading an excerpt from a piece of nonfiction called Suspension of Disbelief. 1. It feels a little like drowning, dead floating, as my swim coach calls it. She tells us to put on our snorkels and spread out across our lanes. Now, all 13 of us lie face down in the pool, our bright orange swim caps bobbing at the surface. Stuck between our legs, pool buoys keep our hips from sinking, but our limbs float aimlessly. At first, I try to hold perfectly still, but soon I let the water take control and allow it to nudge me in different directions. When I move my fingers in front of my face, they feel cold and strangely distant. Coach tells us the point of this exercise is to relax and reflect. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to reflect on. Under the water, everything looks strange and distorted. Light filters through in glowing rings, and I begin counting them. We're supposed to float for only 5 minutes, but it feels like much more time has passed. Maybe the water distorts time, too. I hear a little girl ask her father if we're dead. I'm starting to feel we might be. 2. Float, to rest or move on the surface of a liquid without sinking. To move or hover slowly and lightly, drift. Or put forward an idea as a suggestion or test of reactions. As a noun, it can mean a tool or apparatus for smoothing a surface, or a soft drink with a scoop of ice cream floating in it. There are other definitions, some having to do with rumors, or sports, or fishing. Some use the word itself as part of the definition, like a hollow or inflated organ enabling an organism to float in the water. If you look up synonyms, a variety of other words come up: hover, levitate, hang, but they aren't really synonyms. Hang is by no stretch of the imagination the same as float. It's all in the connotation. Nothing means quite what float does because there's no word that feels quite how float feels. 3. My brother, sister, and I stand at the edge of the parade route, watching the floats pass. On some, dancers swing their limbs in time with music as it blares from speakers. On others, actors dressed in fairy tale costumes wave to the crowd from tall platforms. Patrons of all ages in coordinating t-shirts march close together, handing out stickers and little toys. Strangers with big smiles toss handfuls of colorful taffy from the backs of pickup trucks, and we scramble to catch it. We shove handful after handful into plastic grocery bags, which grow big and heavy as the day progresses. Long after the last fire trucks and marching bands disappear down the street, we scour the sidewalk like vultures, searching for stray candy and trinkets. Only when the sun hangs low in the sky and the police begin to move the signs blocking off the road do our parents usher us away. When we pass the end of the parade route on our way home, we see stray floats sitting on the side of the road. Plucked from the excitement and bustle of the parade, they look empty and ominous. We stare at them through our windows as long as we can as we drive away. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Bianca and I'm from Lexington, South Carolina. I'll be reading a couple sections from my nonfiction piece titled Thoughts and Prayers. It's a piece about things I find comfort in and I hope y'all enjoy. Thoughts and Prayers. 1. I find comfort in the ordinary in 5th grade, watching my best friend make paper cranes when she is bored. Her hair cascades around her, providing a private corner, as her fingers delicately and precisely fold the small pieces of paper. I sit in front of her chair on the dark green carpet, in no way soft or fluffy or comfortable, but I'm comfortable being with her, alone. We half listen to our teacher drone on about fractions, focusing on each other in the small rectangular portable classroom that smells like a pungent storage closet. When she is done, she hands me the gift of her paper crane. I play with it until she finishes her next one, and the cycle continues. She tells me she wants to make 1,000. I don't know if she ever does. I'm so intrigued by her hands working the folds, yet I will never learn how to make them. I am content just watching her. Eventually in 6th grade, she moves on to paper stars. To me, they are good luck charms, or stars you make wishes on. I make a wish for everyone she finishes. I watch her fold them using strips of paper in our English class where we sit at the table in the very back with a perfect view of everyone. We never pay any attention, yet still get the best grades in the class. Folding the paper seems like a prayer for her. After so much time of us doubting the power of prayer, we found our own forms, not in the traditional way of kneeling with our hands together and talking to God, but in our own way, at peace. For her, it was folding small pieces of paper. 2. I find comfort in the ordinary when my roommate and I are girls together. We cry in our beds, a result of heartbreak and the weight of our classes piling on our shoulders. We find comfort in each other, knowing we'll wipe away each other's tears. She rubs my back while I hug my stuffed animal and tell her I am okay. I barely get the words out as tears fall down my cheeks. Her mascara is smeared under her eyes as I prepare her a bowl of the ginger snap cookies I bought at Trader Joe's. She's soon sitting up, eating her cookies and scrolling through her phone. We build comfort together in our small dorm room, our home, making sure it always smells like peaches or basil, making sure there is always a blanket and a beanbag chair for a third friend. We never turn on the big lights, always opting for our desk lamps and sunset lamps we bought for $5 that have somehow outlasted my fairy lights that died in 2 weeks. On Tuesdays, we clean the bathroom together. We prop the door open with a chair, and I play the Hispanic music, the same music that haunted my Sundays, our version of church hymns, when my mom would make my brother and me clean. 3. I find comfort in my discomfort. I am in the mood to be alone. People surround me while I walk the hallways at school. Everywhere I turn, I try to find silence. Their talking seeps loudly into my ears, and I take deep breaths. Counting to 10 while I close my eyes becomes my prayer of repetition. I slide down a wall and sit with my knees to my chest. My hands find the texture of my skin, with the hair that grows and the scars from the discomforts of the past. For a second, I worry I will not find a way to breathe right. I find salvation in the darkness behind my eyes. I breathe again. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Lindsay. I'm from here, Greenville, South Carolina, and I'm going to be reading an excerpt from an essay called The Cat Cemetery. When cats are about to die, they run away from home. Every cat in my life has died in a neighbor's yard or by a creek or far away in some distant place. Then after their bodies were found, they were brought back behind the shed in my backyard to the cat cemetery. If I was ever brave enough to peel back the long grass, step over the knotted weeds, and get over my irrational fear of snakes that were potentially living in hanging fire under the old shed, then I would be able to stand over all the cats that have lived and died in my life. Because before the grass and weeds grew too stressful, before I didn't know how much snakes truly scared me yet, I stood above the corpses of these cats. 3 cats, the first one, the third one, and the third one's unborn child. I let the grass grow long enough to cover their decay. The cat cemetery would become a place I knew like a first preschool or the first church I prayed in as an atheist. For most people, cemeteries serve as the place to remember the dead, but I built one in the corner of my backyard to stash away mournful memories and to forget. But I had faced death before. Before the cat cemetery was built, I sat in a pew of an unfamiliar church next to my dad as he grieved his mother, the grandmother I didn't remember. I remember studying his face and the corners of his eyes like a stranger, awaiting signs of grief to surface. But they didn't, or at least I didn't see them. Then after the funeral for my father's mother, I sat again in a large church room for my neighbor's neighbor. We prayed and grieved, but the next death I would encounter would be the one where, as an atheist, I would actually pray for an afterlife, and it would be the one I tried to forget like religion. The morning my dad told me my godfather died, I only cried for 30 minutes. Then he drove me to school. The commute was only 3 or 4 minutes from our house, 3 to 4 minutes that were filled with a sore silence. Until silently we approached the car line for drop-off, the silence suffocated the space left in my dad's car. Before I left, my father pulled me into a hug, and then he cried. I'd only seen him cry once before, when he announced he was divorcing my mother, a divorce that never went through, but even then he was crying for my brother and me. But this time he wasn't crying for me or anyone else. He was crying because his best friend just died, because he couldn't resurrect his best friend like he did his marriage. He was crying because he trusted me with his escaping grief, but like him, I didn't know what to do with it. I hugged him back silently for a second or two, his silent sobs breaking the suffocating quiet, until I had to leave, until I had to step out of the tiny white Prius, until I had to swallow the lump in my throat and take a long, dragging look at the school in front of me. My dad drove away, and I walked to the bathroom and cried in a stall under the fluorescent lights for a half hour. I cried for my father and godfather, the godfather that I knew I would soon force myself to forget the memory of, because forgetfulness to me would become a bandage or a drug to wound grief. I cried because I knew I wasn't going to cry again. I remember watching the movie Memento with my father. My godfather lent it to us. We watched the main character struggle with memory loss, trying to find the killer of his wife on our living room couch. We watched him tattoo his body, leave himself notes and pictures just so he can remember, so he can pursue death, find it at its root, and face it at its core. Sitting on the living room couch as my dad and I watched the movie, we couldn't quite piece together the importance of Memento and the etymology of its title, To Remember. because after returning the DVD to my godfather, we, father and child, would forget. We would discard the importance of remembrance so we can run away from death, to leave it at its core to be overgrown and complicated like weeds. I remember I was home for the weekend from boarding school when my dad suggested we take a walk. It was dark and still technically summer, but cold was slowly settling into the air, giving me slight goosebumps. The usual sound of summer quieted as the cicadas did, which would be better for holding conversation. I told my dad I was writing about the death we all knew, the death that occurred a year and a half ago and the death we never talked about. But as we walked underneath my favorite purple lamppost at the corner of the street, my dad's grief surfaced again as he talked to me about his godfather's life. He talked about my godmother and her response to her husband's death. He talked about the kids and how they're doing, how he hopes they'll do without their father. A hard lump, the one that hurts too much to push down, began to stick around in my vocal cords like 5-year-old gum under a chair. I paid attention to how odd it felt under the skin of my neck, how it held a couple years of crying. I listened as my father talked about how good of a life my godfather lived. I agreed when he said it was taken too soon. I nodded when he said how unfair it was, and when he said he was a great man, you especially know that. We have to remember Forrest's life. I remembered. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anna Castro-Spratt. I'm from Greer, and I'm also from Brazil, which is relevant to the piece. And this is an excerpt of my essay, These Ordinary Paradoxes of Mine. Part 1, of Fear. I am 8 and I cannot sleep. It is dark, the wind weeps outside, and the shutters of the window slap back at the frame. I'm at the family's ranch. Down the stoned road, the horses wait for my Theo to saddle them, embraced in a tight clump under the roof of the barn. When I glance outside the glass doors, I see the clothesline rippling, underwear floating off in the torrent. Muffled by the rain, I can swear I can hear a faint giggling. I know he is there, standing behind the drifting towels, preparing the knot he is going to hang me with. This ancient man who I'm so used to reading about in my Portuguese picture books, like warnings to stay away. I know about this folklore. I imagined his sharpened teeth, his one dark leg, his foot twisted backwards to throw hunters off of his trail. How each toe sinks into my grandfather's garden every time he hops. The clothesline continues its fit until it is empty and limp. I hear a voice beg me out. As I walk down the stairs of the house, I'm sure that the lights will come on and I will see Sassy standing there, hands out, ready to snatch my little girl body and throw me to crocodiles, into the jungle, and all of the blonde witches. Will I be quick enough to snatch the cap off of his head, hold him powerless in my hands like a chigo flea? Or will my fragility slip me from my balance into his cupped hands as he drags back to the jungle he birthed from? I'm outside now, standing in front of the big pool which I suppose swallowed all of the men who have gone missing on my Tio's ranch. Men who loved with the maids in the kitchen, who made my dinner each night, who will make my bed when I awake, whose grandparents worked on the same cobblestone for far less. Men who made this folklore I tell myself is reality. The storm has subdued within minutes and the pool is still sloshing, sending a shaggy mass from the deep to the shallow in seconds. Sassy Piride's laughing stops. A barn cat floats dead in the water, facial features melted after chewing some kind of parasite, and the water dilutes its fur. I'm not scared of it. I choose that this death in front of me is not what to fear. Lay down on the ripped leather couch inside, imagine his breath moving through the cracks, and wait for Sassy Piride to return. Part 3, of individuality. I do not know who I am until one morning on a Tuesday before school, reading the chapters of post-colonial love poem that I will be quizzed on in 8 hours. It is the first time I have read slowly in hours, letting the words breach until their impact finally understands me. I read about hips repeatedly, put my hands on mine and press them down until I hear a faint pop and imagine them being somebody else's. Perhaps the husband that my grandparents, still deeply rooted in young marriage tradition, is so concerned will not come. The one they say I should have met already, should have organized a future with before 14, so I'd know how many children I'd have by college graduation. When Natalie Diaz writes about waterways, I let myself sink into them, thinking of the rivers of fading culture to get me to this big town in the United States,
reading a book about Native Americans and knowing that I must discover how I relate to them by class time, so my white teacher can tell me that this resonated, right? 'Cause you're not from here. Regardless, I'll have to tell her yes. I do not know who I am until I see a cultured woman teach me how to compress myself into words in a language I shouldn't know but let people think I'm a prodigy of. And eventually, they begin to believe that the way I let the words out is mine. Eventually, I become the cultured woman, writing of waterways and hips and paradoxes that make me what we call individual. Thank you.
That is not easy to do, and they did it really well, so another round of applause for this group. Thank you all so much for being here. If you'd like to take some photos afterward or anything like that, stick around, say hello to folks. Otherwise, let's all go to Taco Bell. I'll see you there in a few minutes. All right, bye. Thank you all, bye.